We're on live. Welcome back. Uh, thank you, Samantha, for that catch. Appreciate that. Tiger King. Okay. Oh, Henry, yeah, thanks. I still haven't set up my perfect environment here yet. Okay. All right. Everybody can still see the screen though, yeah? Cool. Okay, I forked this. Oh, this can go away. Okay. So everything is still installing. In the meantime, let's open this up. Take a look-see here and see what we've got. So most of this skeleton has already been created for us. Personally, I think that's unfortunate. I would have liked this to have written that from scratch. I don't know. I didn't need to design this one. But let's take a look at what we've got. We've got our action types. We have an increment and a decrement. Not doing too much, just telling us that we have at least these different types of actions. We have a counter actions file. This looks like we've already got, again, our actions built out for us. Looks like it might have been a small lab. Where we have this increment count and our decrement count. All right, cool. Let's take a look at our index.js. We are creating a store here with looks like it's just an empty reducer that we'll probably have to update to be a real reducer because I don't think we're really using that yet. Let's see, we're still installing. We have our app file here. This was probably taken from like Code Sandbox or something because it looks like the Webpack is built into it. So that's kind of interesting format. And we're having a counter container. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to assume there's nothing really in the reducer because that wasn't around. We have a combined reducers. Haven't taught that yet. Going to teach that today. Counter container looks like it's got a bunch of code in it where it's passing things to our component counter, which looks like this is already done for us. This is just presentational. So looks like we just have to update the logic of the container. And it looks like it tells us the logic. I'm assuming our count is actually going to be held in our Redux store because that is the focus of the lab. Okay, so looks like everything's installed. Let's go ahead and run npm start and just see what things at least look like. Oh yeah, and this is like kind of annoying. So maybe I will keep it in an incognito window because that seemed to work better yesterday. Don't know why that works better. I think it just doesn't cache any information maybe. And we've got our counter app. Doesn't do anything yet because nothing's hooked up. Okay. So the first thing I think we should probably do if we're moving over to Redux is let's go ahead and create our reducer. So we've already got our default state set. I'm going to show another pattern that you'll often sometimes see is like const default state set to 0, and then in here you write default state. The underscore means usually that you don't actually, this is a variable that you don't really plan on using. But that's sometimes a way you'll see it as well. They're writing export default. This is the same thing as me writing like const count reducer.
I was going to ask you like how
default.
Then if you write it the other way, how do you import it in another file because there's no actual name that you're calling now?
Yeah, that's cool. So it's a great question, Ashia. Essentially, you just call it whatever you want from that other file. Like if we're doing it like this, right? We want to import count reducer and stay consistent. But if we're doing like this and we're trying to import it, because this is fine, we just import it with whatever. We can say import, we could even say Cookie Monster. You know, it doesn't matter from, and then that path to this. So you just get to name it here wherever you're importing it.
Okay.
That's also a fairly common pattern that you'll see out there. I kind of like the other way just because it tells me exactly, like it lets me look at this file without reading the top and know what it is as well.
Right.
So I'm gonna go back to count reducer because that's just my personal preference, but that's not, doesn't have to be yours. Sometimes I'll do it the other way if I'm just trying to code really fast. Okay, so we have our switch statement by convention. Our key is going to be looking at our action dot type, right? So in the event, and we have a couple different cases. I think one of the cases is increment, right? Let's look at our action types, increment, decrement. Let's go ahead and, oh, we've already imported those. So looks like we need those. So we'll just return our state plus 1. Remember, we don't want to be doing something like state plus equals 1 because, well, I think that might actually work okay, but that's, you want to return a new state. And this is like using reassignment. So you could kind of think of this as like mutating. So you don't want to do that. So we do state plus 1 for increment. Let's do a case for our decrement. And we'll say return state minus 1. Cool. And by default, we'll just return our state. Okay. So we've set up kind of the baseline here. So I guess now is a good time to start introducing the root reducer. I was going to do that later, but I can do that now. So this is called a root reducer. I should update this because I called this count reducer. And so what combined reducers does is it can take in more than one reducer. And why does that matter? So when we are dealing with our store over, and I guess that's in our index.js file. When we're dealing with our store can only take in one reducer. That's all it can take in for now. When we get to Redux Toolkit, we'll get to do something called configure store instead of create store, and it already behaves kind of like combined reducers. So that's pretty cool. But for now, when we're dealing with just plain old Redux, our create store can only take in this one reducer. So if we have multiple reducers, so because maybe our app in real life does more than just counting things, right? Maybe our app also has to-do lists or businesses or reviews or users, right? We would have multiple reducers to handle it, so we don't have to write some one giant, long, confusing reducer. We would split up our logic into smaller kind of slices of what things should deal with. This is going to deal with users. This is dealing with reviews, posts. And so because of that, we still need, when an action is dispatched, because we don't know what that action actually is, we need it to go through all of the reducers at one time. So what combine reducers does is it can take in multiple reducers and combine them into one reducer. So that's all that does. They're naming it index.js. I can kind of, this folder, I'll explain that in a second. But so combine reducers, again, this is called, he's just exporting default. I'm going to make this a little bit more clear in a way. So I'll say const root reducer, reducer. And then here I'll just export default my root reducer. So it's the same kind of thing. This is going to return to us a reducer. Combined reducers always takes in an object, and then the keys of that object are going to be the names of the different slices of state in your application, and the value should be the reducer themselves. So if I would have named count reducer count, then I would have just been able to write count like the way it was already written. But since I updated the name to specifically be count reducer, I have to say that this count slice points to count reducer.
So why did you change the name count to count reducer?
I did that because I think it will be slightly more clear to the audience.
Okay.
But you wouldn't have to. It does that just kind of comes down to programming taste a bit. This is like kind of the way I specifically learned it. So I often write things the way I originally learned it because I ended up liking it more then. Although sometimes there are things that change and then I update and do them that way because I think it's an improvement. But to me, this is more clear what's going on, especially to people who aren't as familiar with Redux. So let's go ahead and import our root reducer inside of our index.js. So I'm going to import root reducer from /reducers. So I usually like to name things by like what's inside of them, right? So I would usually be renaming this like root reducer. And then in here, I would be saying /root reducer, right? However, something you might want to know about is if a file is called index, this is just kind of a good thing to know. So if inside of your folder has a file called index, if you import just from that folder, you automatically get from the index file. So I don't have to do /index here because index is what will come automatically. That's just kind of a built-in thing. Questions on that? I know that's the first time we've heard that.
So that's mean like if you have a folder inside index, we don't have to do the /index.js. It's going to read it.
That's right. We can just import from that folder and we will get from the index file.
Okay, thank you.
So it's kind of like a little shortcut sometimes. You know, do with it what you want.
Okay, so when you're importing in the index.js file in source, I import for the let store equals create store. I set that equal to my count reducer that I created in the count.js. Now we're importing import root reducer from reducers index.js. What is the difference between the two?
This one is using combined reducers. So we're combining. Right now, we only have one reducer, so it hardly matters because we're dealing with like a world where there aren't slices of state, but just state. But typically in a larger application, you have more than one reducer. Different reducers are in charge of different concepts of your app, which are considered slices of state. So you might have a user slice, a post slice, comment slice, and all that. And so you can combine those different reducers in here and you'll get these different slices of state. Count right now refers to the count slice of state. But if I had another reducer, my next key would refer to that slice of state. And so root reducer gives us back this singular reducer, which we can then use inside of our store, because our store create store only takes in one reducer. But if we had a multiple reducer app, we would want all of those reducers to be able to receive actions that are dispatched.
Okay.
All right, so let's try this. So let's give it a root reducer here. Okay. That looks like we've got our root reducer in there. I don't see any errors. We've increment, decrement, count is defined. So let's go ahead and update our container. So in here, we got to deal with all of our connection of our Redux app and our React app. So let's go ahead and import our use selector and our use dispatch from React Redux. Okay, so now we've got those two things. So instead of our count here, I'm going to call this const because that's better practice. Let's go ahead and say use selector. And use selector takes in a function that takes state in as its argument. And let's go ahead and take a look at what that state is. Okay, so we'll throw a debugger in there. Oh, this is not full screen, that's why. There we go. Let's open up our developer tools. So when this application runs, we hit this and we're in our use selector. And let's take a look at what state is in this callback function. So we can see this is the state, or this is the application state coming from our store. So this key count exists because of our root reducer, where we said count is going to point to this slice of state. Now this slice of state we saw from our count reducer just has a default state of 0. So we should have a current application state with the key count pointing to 0, which is what we have. That's where that's coming from. So we go, okay, so what slice of state do we want to deal with? Well, we want to be dealing with the count slice. So if I return state.count, I'll have my 0, which will replicate what was there prior. So I'm going to go inside, back into our container, and I will return state.count. I go, okay, that looks good. If I want to dispatch, I have to create that variable first. So I'm going to go ahead and say const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. I'll invoke that and go, okay. So inside of my increment, this is like a semi-redundant container in a sense, because I have an increment count here. I could just do all this in my counter. But if I want this to purely be presentational and I want this to handle the logic and state of things, I'll just go, okay, let me dispatch our increment count. And I have to invoke that because increment count is just a function. We can only dispatch actions, right? So I have to invoke our function to get our action back, because increment count action gives us back this object, which is an action with our type increment. And then that can be dispatched to the reducer. So I have to invoke that first. Let's go ahead and do decrement. It's the exact same thing. Dispatch, decrement count, invoke, and it should be working now. So let's refresh our page. Let me continue out of here. And we have the ability to update everything. Okay. So that was That was the lab, I think. The only sorry.
Sorry, would you mind going to that count.js page that you made in the reducer? I mean, that was already there in the reducer. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And so this is what we already did yesterday, but we just did it with fruits. But it looks like we would be doing it on change. Yeah, I don't think we need to get into all the bonuses today. Unless there's a specific bonus that people were really having trouble with. Okay, any other questions on how we built this counter app?
Can you
Okay.
show the container page?
Yeah. What's your question about it?
My dispatch is not being read properly. The const dispatch equals use dispatch.
Did you import use dispatch?
Yes, from React Redux.
And then it should be. What's the error say?
It's saying state is not defined.
Are you referring to state in this component?
I'm referring to state in for line 7 where it says const count equals use selector state.
Yeah.
And then we're returning state.count. It's saying that state is undefined.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can Slack John or Jenya that snippet of your code, and they can take a look at that. It sounds more individual. That's hopefully they'll be able to help you on that. Any other general questions on how this is working? So, okay, I did this with Danny the other day. So let's do this today here. So I'm going to put a debugger in our account reducer. Okay, I'm going to put a debugger in our increment count. I am going to put a debugger in my use selector. And I will put a debugger in my increment call here. Okay, so I've got debuggers everywhere, essentially. Let's see. Yeah, that's everywhere I want to. Okay, so get ready to use the chat. All right, so here's the game. Well, okay, when I refresh the page over there, where is the first debugger that we will hit? Okay, everybody write your answer in the chat. Upon refresh, which debugger will I hit? We have one in increment count. We have one in our count reducer. We have one in our increment call inside of counter container, and we have one inside of our use selector.
Wait, I'm so sorry. Can you run through that one more time? Where are they?
Sure. Okay, so we've got a debugger in our use selector. We have a debugger in this increment function. We have a debugger in our action creator increment count. And we have a debugger in our reducer, our count reducer. Take your bets, ladies and gentlemen.
Can you go back to counter container again?
I can.
It was-
Getting a lot of reducer guesses. I'm into this. Count reducer because it has the initial state. Kong says the use selector. Maria with the reducer. Oh, Hedor between counter container and reducer. Repeat reducer. Doug says, Jay Fowler says reducer. John Jones, count reducer. Kong, count reducer. Okay, what else we got? Giovanni, count reducer. Doug Moracho goes from to reducer. Interesting change, Doug. You're definitely closer than Sihon with the reducer. What else we got? Let's keep it going. Come on. Speed round, lightning round, Sin, count reducer. Okay, Maria says count reducer. Marvin reducer. Kevin reducer. Okay, excellent. Kong with another one. Karen, Brandon, nice. Okay, so we're getting Karen says container. Okay, so a little different. A dissenter. I like that. John Jones, can you unmute yourself for a second?
Yeah.
So you were one of the early people that said count reducer. Can you tell me why?
I said count reducer because can you go back to the count reducer?
I certainly can.
Oh, I said count reducer because I believe it would be one of the first things that it hits because I see the count reducer taken in state, so I feel like it will check the state first. So I feel like it will hit the count reducer first.
Okay, cool. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to that? Yeah,
Good way to
Fowler?
hit the reducer first, because that's the first thing that goes into the store. Use selector allows you to select from your store, so it wouldn't hit that first, right? It needs to see the reducer that's in the store. And then the other things tie back to accessing the selector, which couldn't access anything unless the reducer ran first.
Okay. I gotcha. Okay, let's try it out. So I think we already did this. Okay, so here we'll refresh. Hang on, I just want to make sure I get a fresh one here. Okay. Okay, so we're in here. The very first thing we hit here is our count reducer. That is correct. Now, the reason we're hitting our count reducer is because inside of our index here where we are creating our store, when we are creating that store, it runs through all of the reducers. It just does that as part of its setup. One way we can see that is if I do action, and we see if I do action.type, I get this random bullcrap that looks random to me, probably to you as well, or it's like the at Redux, intif, whatever. What is that? I don't know. I have no idea. But it's not one of the actions that we've dispatched and are looking for. So this is something that Redux is doing to set up itself, okay? So when you first load the page, Redux is configuring its store, setting everything up. All right, in the chat, where are we going next if I hit continue? Thanks, Jay. The selector looks good. It's okay if you don't know. Just guess. Container, nice guess. Phil, Sam's guessing container. Kong with use selector. Doug. Doug. Samantha, use selector. Giovanni. Brandon, that's okay. Samantha says, I think. Kevin says selector. Henry says container. Which part of the container, Henry? Marvin, selector over feed. Carol Baskin. And Doug Maracho, LOL, misspell. Jonathan says, sure. Deja, LOL. Okay, these are no longer guesses. Let's go check it out. We are back in the count reducer. Isn't that funny? Gotcha. Right? This is, let's take a look at action.type. It's another Redux setup thing. Okay. I wouldn't have expected you to know that. I don't know how many times it runs, but it does do this, I think, a few times. So I'm going to continue through again, because I think we'll still guess the selector again. And we're back in the reducer. This time our action type looks like the same as it was a minute ago. We'll continue again. And this time we are in the selector. So this is where a lot of people thought. So once the reducers are set up, we're able to move forward into the selector. And here we can take a look at our state where we have this key, which we're getting from our root reducer, and the value, which we're getting from the specific reducer we're pointing to at that key. Okay. If I continue from here, where are we going to go? Throw it in the chat. Throw it in the chat. Throw it in the chat. Throw it in the chat.
Don't judge my memory, but what are my options again?
Judged. No, judge, jury, and executioner. Let's do this.
Debuggers, I don't remember.
So that's no big deal. Count reducer has a debugger.
Okay. Yes.
Our container has a use selector debugger, which we're currently in.
Yes.
Our increment function has a debugger,
Okay.
and our counter action increment has a debugger.
Okay.
Okay, we got some guesses here. Deja says the container. Rafid says the container. Remember, there are two different debuggers in the container. There's one in selector, which we're currently on, and then there's one in the increment function. Henry says increment function. Maria says counter action. Samantha says increment. Brandon says increment. Increment. Phil, Karen. Okay, excellent. Sin, I don't see you on here, man. Where are you at? Where's your guesses? Well, Ujwaka Basi, I don't think I've seen you yet either. Kevin Wong says increment. Karen says increment. I'm Mia for this one. What's that mean, Sin?
I think he meant MIA.
Oh, okay. Thanks. And you just earned yourself a nickname. Awesome. Mia Perez. Javon, no button press. Would any of these things fire without an action? Oh, Fowler brings a very interesting question. Ujwaka Basi says, I feel like those won't run unless you hit the button first. Very astute, Ujwaka Basi. Good point, says Marvin. Let's go see. I think Ujwaka Basi and Fowler are starting to convince the class. Very cool. John Jones still throwing up the reducer. Appreciate the guts. Let's go ahead and hit play. Continue. Well, we're still in our use selector, but that's just because of a refresh. Don't worry about that. We exit. Right? Because action can only get fired when we're dispatching an action. Increment function can only get fired when we're clicking on increment. And we've already hung out at the reducer and all that. So what's going to happen? Where are we going to hit when I hit plus? When I click plus here, where are we going to go? This one's for Sam. We have a debugger in our action creator. We have a debugger in our root reducer of our count reducer here, and we have two debuggers, one in use selector and one in increment. Marvin, C. Hummer feed. Sam, you guys are all on the same page. Brandon throwing up there. Yeah, Henry. Henry's saying count reducer. Interesting. Interesting. Crystal says increment. Karen says increment. Doug, what button are you hitting? I will be hitting the big old plus sign or the little. Here, let me get a big. Sin says increment as well. Thank you, Mia. Phil says increment. Then it will tunnel down. Oh, I like that. I like the imagery there, Jay. Kevin, increment. All right, let's check it out. So I'm going to click plus, and we are inside of increment, right? Cha-ching, cha-ching. Congratulations, nearly everybody. So let's talk about why that happened, right? When we click on the increment, we fire the increment function. This has to be the function that gets fired. This is the first thing that would happen. Okay. So now, this is where it's going to get a little bit more interesting. I think I'll get a few of you. Where do we go next? Put it in the chat.
Can I see the top of this page, please? Of the
yeah.
Thank you.
Your options one more time. This one's for John Jones. We have our debugger here and use selector, our debugger and count reducer. You guys could write these four things down. This debugger in your counter action or action creator, I guess I should say. And then we also have debuggers in use selector and increment. So Marvin says increment action type. Is there a debugger there? Marvin, are you talking about, there's nothing in the types except for just these?
Yeah, I meant the counter actions. I was like following on.
So there is one in our increment count action.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing counter actions, a lot of counter actions. Rafid, you wrote counter. Which one? What's that? Counter action, count reducer?
I changed it to counter action.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah.
Can you go back to counter action? Absolutely. I'm right there right now, Ujwagabasi. This is the action creator. Counter action. Okay. Ooh, I'm seeing a lot of counter actions. Not bad. So Vani says increment count, which he means action creator there. Nice. Okay. Counter action because of the return. So, okay. I think that's good. So the return actually isn't helping us here, Ujwagabasi, but we do have to go into our increment count because when we click on, where was it? In our container. Here, we can look at which of these two functions are going to fire first. There's a dispatch and there's increment count. But since this is the inner function, this is going to resolve first. So we have to fire increment count inside of our action creator. So let's go ahead and confirm that. And we are inside of our action creator. Cool. Here, I'll make that a little larger too, if you can't see. All right. Finally, where do we go next? Where are we going next? Doug with the reducer. Okay. Marvin reduce 2 for reducer. Fowler for reducer. Sin for reducer. Karen for reducer, Brandon for reducer, Henry for reducer, Brutus for reducer. Who's gonna go with reducer? Can I get another reducer? Can I get a reducer from Siam? Let's go. Ohidur, I like to use a lifeline. Calling up a friend, Ohidur. We'll move it down to 50-50 on who wants to be a millionaire. And we will go somewhere between reducer or use selector. Ohidur, that's your lifeline. Is it reducer or is it use selector? Okay, goes with reducer. Smart man. Philip. We got reducer. Sam with reducer. Nilber, what is reducer? What is reducer? I believe people are referring to here count reducer. Oh, Jeopardy. I like it. And classic Alex Trebek, I will say, that's very funny. I love watching Jeopardy. It's so fun getting 3 questions right in an episode. Really, nothing can make you feel dumber faster than watching a couple episodes of Jeopardy. But it's good fun. Okay, let's go ahead and check where we're at. I'm going to hit continue, and we do end up in that count reducer because now we have this action, and we do have our type increment that is being passed in. So every time we get dispatch, right, dispatch dispatches actions to the reducer. And now the reducer can do some sort of update to the state, right? That's what happens. The reducer is going to update or give us that new slice of that state. And so who's going to be watching that slice? Go ahead and put your guesses in the chat. Who is watching that slice of state? So where will we go next? Marvin with selector. Good selection. Let's see here. Doug selector, Giovanni, use selector, encounter container. Okay, nice. Getting very, very specific in location. I like that. Kevin Wong with the selector. Samantha, use selector. Sin, I wonder if people are getting influenced by other people. I'm wondering. Henry says dispatch. Okay, nice guess. Sam says yes, definitely being influenced. Thank you for your honesty. Yeah, I'm being influenced too, so that's not good. Okay, where the dispatch is I'm confused if that's a question or a statement. Ashia. Brandon says use selector. Sin says I'm guessing now. Cool. John Jones says selector. Okay, so every time there's a change in our store, we have something looking at our state, our application state, and every time there's a change in that, this has got to update, right? So if that's got to update, this is going to change. This is replicating, by the way, the behavior of map state to props. I know we're not dealing with that, but you may see that someday in an older code base. So let's go ahead and hit continue. And we are inside of our container. So now we can look and our state has updated. You'll see that our value here is still 0 because we haven't actually hit our return statement in this function. We've just hit the inside of our use selector. Right? And if I continue, I think we get stuck in there again, but purely because this component is re-rendering because of the change. And now we're back out with the updated value of 1. Okay, so that is the flow. Let's go through it one more time. Upon the refresh of the page, we end up in the reducer, right? This is not particularly interesting. This is Redux setting up itself. I can continue, and we're there again. It's doing some more setup in the reducer again, doing some setup. And now we're in the use selector where it's looking at the state so we can get exactly the count we want. And then we're in there again as part of the re-render. And now we have our app. When we click on increment, we fire our increment function. So we end up in there, which is going to dispatch whatever we get back from this action creator that we have. So we're going to first go to the action creator, which is our increment count, and we're going to be returning some sort of object or action, right? And that action will be dispatched. So we'll end up next in our reducer with our increment action. So type increment. From here, we'll have updated the store, and so therefore we'll hit our use selector again. Then for the re-render, we'll hit use selector again. And then we're back on. Okay, so that is our flow. What a journey. It's all about the journey, not the final destination, right? Let's go ahead and remove these debuggers because those are going to get annoying when I forget about them. And okay. So let's take a 5-minute break. Let's be back at 11 and we'll start to go over some other stuff. Okay. See you soon. Still figuring out the exact best approach for me to do this, but I think we're just gonna go for it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up our code from yesterday. So the current application from the lab, let's get rid of it. And instead, let's go ahead and get our fruit cart app from yesterday happening. So I'll worry about deleting that later. I think I have way too many tabs open at this point. Okay. CD into React fruit stand. Okay, so I'm going to open that up from yesterday. Full screen it. Okay, I'm going to get this started. Sorry for the siren. I just recently killed somebody, and they are looking. No, horrible joke. Let's try another one. That siren is going for a guy who's got a comb stuck over his ear. He's in trouble. Okay, well, I got some people on the chat are probably smashing the joke. Run Corey, dark, LOL. Okay, understandable. All right, yeah, not as bad of a, not as many sick burns as I was expecting to get from you all. But that's okay. So you're welcome to go for my jugular, because that's what I did. Boom. I'm trying to move all this stuff out of my way. I don't really want this. Okay, here we go. Sorry, it's kind of a pain in the neck, some sort of setting up some of these things. Okay, so this is what we've got from yesterday, right? Hopefully it looks pretty familiar, Dexter vibes. You can be my Morgan, John Jones. So let's talk about this. Let's add a new slice of state. That's what I want to do. So to add us this new slice of state, we are going to look at we're going to start with a new reducer. Okay, so let's pretend that I have a farmer's reducer, because, you know, I've got farmers as part of my fruit stand. So let's make a new reducer. So inside of here, we're going to make a new file, which I'm going to call this farmers reducer.js. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and go const farmers reducer. And I'm going to have this state. And I want to have this kind of shape. Let's talk about this. Let's say I want to have my state look like where I'll have this object and I'll have the ID. So let's say I have ID 1 pointing to ID 1 of this object, name, Corey, and paid, we'll say is false. So we'll have this kind of a shape. One being, this would be the next ID, and we'll say is John. Okay. So this is the state goal that we're trying to get. This is pretty common pattern for normalized state. I know Nilver shared a cool library the other day called Normalizer that I definitely recommend checking out. And maybe he'll share that again if we need that. So let's go ahead and create my default state. So I'm going to say const default state. And so this should default to just an empty object in the event that I don't have anything. So state, and I'll say my default state. And what's the second thing reducer takes in? Who can tell me? Who can tell me?
Action.
Action? Okay, great. I like it. So we will go to action, a call to action. And let's go ahead and I'm going to show you a couple different things. So the first thing I'm going to show you is one of the ways a lot of people used to write this. This is going to kind of change with Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit, I think, was added October of 2019. It's opinionated, and it is the official toolkit for Redux. Like the team that made Redux Toolkit. So there is a lot of like, it's going to grow in popularity a lot. That being said, one of the older common practices is to throw like an object.freeze in here. And this essentially means that if I try to mutate my state in any way, it will throw an error because I am freezing this object. That's all. This is just a better way for me to ensure that I don't accidentally mutate it. I can also go ahead and make a copy of my state right away. I could say new state and do this spread operator of state. So I'm going to do that as well. And now I'm going to have my switch statement. So I'm going to say action.type. I guess we can go ahead and add our action types. Maybe I should do this in a different folder. I'm just going to file or something, but I'm just going to do everything in here today. And so I'm going to say, let's say I want to hire farmer. And I did that wrong, but okay. Whoops. Copy that, paste that. And let's say I want to pay my farmer. Okay, so these are my two cases. Now, this happens to be two. In this case, there can be many more, right? I know both of our reducers so far have like two things. That's not like the norm. That's just what it is, happens to be today. Okay, so let's go ahead and import those inside of our farmer's reducer. So at the top, oops, I don't want to break up that. Let's go ahead and import. I think we called it hire farmer. And I think we had it called pay farmer. Is that right? Yep. Cool. And that is coming from our /action/action types. Cool. So let's just space these out a little bit nicer. Okay. So in the event that we have hire farmer, what do we want to do? Well, let's go ahead and make this farmer. So let's say let our farmer. And I'm going to have this object. And let's say that I'm actually getting all of these things off of off of a database somewhere. Like I'm expecting to already have this farmer. I'm expecting to have their ID. I'm expecting to have everything. Okay. Because I want us to start thinking in the world of like, we already have a database a little bit, because that's where we're going to end up going. So I'm going to go, okay, cool. So I'm going to spread our action.payload, because this is going to be what our farmer is. And then I'm also going to just update the property paid to be false, or add that property if it's not already in there. Okay, so this is our farmer. Inside of our new state, which we created here on line 11, I'm just going to add that property. I'm going to say new state, add our farmer.id. So that's going to give us, at this key, I want us to be assigned this value. So that way I'm going to have the ID of the object pointing to the object. This is somewhat of a common pattern of state that you'll see. Questions so far? Okay, so let's break into little groups. 10 minutes. I think we can do it in 5. 5 minutes, write a pay farmer. Okay, I want you to write a pay farmer, and also just, and here we'll just return state. Okay, so go ahead in your, any questions on the expectation? Okay, well then I'm going to make some breakout rooms. We've got 26 people. Let's put them in 7 rooms. So we'll have 3 to 4 participants per room. All right, I'm gonna give us 5 minutes. And I'll see you all in a bit. Let's add that part to the reducer. People are
Yes.
seeing it. Yeah,
Yes.
the numbers are flooding in. This is just like the real polls. I love it. Oh, I love the data. Love it. All right, I think that's enough votes. If you didn't vote for right now, you're not that engaged. Okay, let me share the results so you can see how you're feeling compared to the majority. So we're mostly in the middle, right? We've got a curve slanting towards the positive, so that's decent. But we do have a couple people who very much didn't feel like it went well, and nobody who really felt like they knocked it out of the park. So, okay, let's. It's a good starting point. Okay. So let's go ahead and build this out. So let's create our build farmer. So we know that's going to start with a case. So we're going to say pay farmer. And we can go ahead and find the farmer we want to update. So let farmer to pay, let's say. And we can get that farmer from our new state, which we're getting from line 11. So I can say new state at, well, what would we really need to get? What would our payload probably be if we were calling to pay this farmer?
Money.
What would make sense? An ID. Doug says ID. Yeah, anyone else feel like ID might be good?
Yeah.
We probably don't need this whole farmer object. We just need to know which farmer. So I'm going to go ahead and think that my action.payload is the ID. So I'm going to go ahead and say action.payload. So by doing that, let's say action.payload was 2, I would be getting back this object. This is my farmer to pay. So I go, okay, so let's go ahead and pay that farmer. So I'm going to say farmer to pay dot paid, because I know they have a paid property. And I could just say true, or let's pretend that this is more like toggle farmers pay. And I'm just going to say farmer to pay dot paid. So whatever it wasn't before, it is now. And let's go ahead and return our new state. Okay. So we'll be able to test this out a little bit better in a moment, but we could test this if we wanted to right now. But it will be a little bit annoying, so I'm going to wait.
Could you go over the line 22?
Sure. I'm saying whatever, because farmer to paid, the farmer dot paid is going to be either a true or a false. And so I'm saying whatever it was not is what it is now. So I'm just reassigning this property to be whatever it was prior, but the opposite.
Oh, because in the previous situation, farmer to pay was false, so now it's not false.
Yeah. So this is more, I'm treating it more of like a toggle, but, and maybe toggle would be better. Maybe I should just assign it to true. Don't consider yourself wrong if you wrote true. That's okay. Yours may actually be better because of the way it's written. Yep.
How is the new state being used with like the action.payload? I don't get why it's set to that in line 21.
This is a getter method, and this is creating a new variable for whatever this gets. So our new state is a replication of our previous state, which I'll say is like, let's say it's this. And so I'm saying at the key of our action.payload. So at one of these IDs, I'll get back one of these objects.
Oh, the action.payload is the object of farmers.
No, the action.payload is the ID. Keying into it gives us back the object. Look at the object on lines 1 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
So if we key into that object, we get back another object.
Okay.
Okay, and let's go ahead and export it. Export default farmers reducer. So now we have two reducers, right? We have a farmers reducer and we have this fruit stand reducer. So our store can't just be taking fruit stand reducer. It has to take in some other reducer, which is commonly referred to as the root reducer. So let's go ahead and create that new reducer. So I'm going to call this root reducer, or I could call it index.js, whatever. I'm going to call it root reducer just because that's just the way I like to code. And I am going to import my two other reducers. So I'm going to import fruit stand reducer from / fruit stand reducer. I'm going to import my farmers reducer from my / farmers reducer. And and since I have to combine these two reducers, I'm going to import combine reducers from Redux. Now this is a Redux thing, right? So we've talked about things that are React Redux. No, this is Redux. So this works without React. Okay. And so now let's go ahead and call it. So I'm going to say const root reducer. And I'm going to assign that to whatever we get back from combine reducers. I'm going to invoke combine reducers, and I have to pass in this object as the argument. That is required. I'm going to go ahead and export it. And now, back inside, I'm going to say which reducers I want to combine and what I want to call that slice of state. So I'm going to call one slice of state fruits, and I'm going to have that point to whatever we get back from our fruit stand reducer. I'm also going to create a farmer's slice of state, which I'm going to say I get this back from our farmer's reducer. Okay. Give me a yes on the nonverbal chat when you are this far.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why is the fruit stand reducer imported from farmer's reducer, and the same thing for farmer's reducer?
Where are they imported from?
On line 2 and 3. Well, fruit stand reducer, it says from farmer's reducer, and then farmer's reducer.
Why? Because it's a mistake.
Oh.
Good catch. That's a good catch. Thank you. Did I fix that? Yeah. So I was mixing up which reducer was which. So I would have had a fruits slice pointing to farmers, and I would have had a farmer slice pointing to fruits. So that would have been a little confusing. Good catch. Thank you.
Can we combine more than one reducer?
This is combining two reducers.
Two. No, more than two, I mean.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can combine as many as you want. You know, it's pretty common to have maybe a UI thing that talks about whether or not something's loading. Sometimes there's an errors reducer. This is going to handle all of our errors. Now, our errors reducers, some errors reducers are broken up themselves. So we might have another combine reducers where we have like our user or session errors, let's say session errors, right? And we might have our like review errors. So we could have all these errors, and this would be just our errors reducer. And then in here, we would just have our errors reducer. So you can also use combine reducers multiple times to create these different nestings and how deep within your UI. That's definitely something you could do. That's a great question. That's so part of that is all part of something called reducer composition, which I think we'll eventually talk a little bit more about as well. But you know, there could be a thought process where like our farmers reducers should be handling farmers, like all of them, and not like an individual farmer. So we could make another reducer that we call as just a regular function that's going to handle like individual farmers. So like instead of, I guess I can make like a quick example of that. I don't want to go too deep, but let's say I have like const farmer, and this takes in some state, whoops, some state and action. This is part of reducer composition. I might have a switch here, let's say, where I'm also looking for higher farmer. Whoops. And, oh, well, yeah, sorry, mixing it up, I'm going too fast. My value here should be higher farmer. This would be action.type still. And so in the event of a higher farmer, maybe I just return, whoops, something like return an object where it's our action.payload and paid points to false. And so in this case, I could call, instead of doing this line, I would instead say new state farmer ID, or I would say, I could say like let farmer equals farmer dot, and I could pass in just, I'm not using anything here. So let's say null, and my action would be the same action that I already had. Right, so this is essentially doing the same thing, but this is handling the creation of like this individual farmer and not affecting. So I'm taking this farmer and I'm passing in null, so we're not looking at the state here. And our action is still this farmer's payload. And so I'm just saying action.payload, get this. So this also works. And this is part of, and I might do the same thing for this, because pay farmer seems very like individual farmer driven. But I don't want to go too deep into that right now. Just want to demonstrate that this is all part of reducer composition, where reducers can call other reducers, different reducers can be combined in different ways. There's actually quite a bit to it, and it's kind of cool, but it's a little like confusing at first. But if you don't completely follow that, don't worry. We'll probably talk about more about that at a future point. Just be more okay with the second slice of state. Going. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and come back to our root reducer. And so let's go ahead and create a couple more actions. So I'm going to call this farmer actions. Let's go ahead and make a farmer actions.js. And let's go ahead and make this const hire farmer. And this will take in a farmer. And we will be returning our action, right? So we'll say type hire farmer, which we're getting from there. And our action, our payload will just point to our farmer. All right, so now we've got this farmer. Oh, after we exported our root reducer, we do need to add that into our store instead. So let's go ahead and import our root reducer from /reducer/root reducer. And so I'm passing our root reducer. Now, just to kind of show you what I mean, if we go back to our farmer reducer, we made this like slice of state. Let's pretend we already want this state in here for whatever reason. We can go to our store and let's go ahead and add our initial state. So our initial state will look like an object. And so right now we have our fruits key pointing to an empty array. And then we'll also have our farmers. Farmers pointing to an object with these properties in here. All right, so this is just so we have these things in here, just for fun, more than anything, just to see that we can pass stuff in. And it's been a while since we've tested anything. So let's go ahead and test on just the window that some of these things work. So if we remember how we test on the window, I'm going to go to our index.js. And I am going to import. Let's go. I'm just going to do it underneath all this. I'm going to import our hire farmer from our actions.
Oh, Corey, did you export it? I'm not sure if you did.
I did not. Good call. Export. Const hire farmer. Thank you. Appreciate that, Marvin. So we're just going to go ahead and put this action on the window. So I'll say window dot hire farmer is equal to hire farmer. And while I'm here, I'm also going to put the store on the window just so I can check how the store is getting changed. So I'm going to say store is equal to store. Remember store, what does store have? What does store give us back?
You said, what does store give us back?
Yes.
An object.
An object? Okay. What's in that object?
The reducer.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I think store gives us back an object with 4 functions. I've seen some people write with functions. Yeah. What are those functions?
Replace reducer.
Okay.
Initial state.
Initial state's not a function.
Get state.
Get state. Yeah.
Dispatch. Dispatch? No.
Dispatch. Yep. Good. Very important.
Uh,
And subscribe, I'm seeing in the chat. Crystal, nice job. Brandon, good. Phil, nice. Okay. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and just test what we've written. So, brilliant. It's missing the comma in our store. I think I just made a small oopsie. Whoopsie daisy. I got to add a comma in our object. Hire farmer is not exported. I thought I did export that. Oh, because it's not exported from fruit stand. Look at all these errors. Data slash farmer actions. There we go. Let's try again. Fruits.map is not a function. That's okay. We can handle that. So that's because in our component where we did our fruit stand, or no, sorry, our fruit cart, we called fruits.map because we did state and state. But let's take a look at this real quick before we go too deep. And if I just throw a debugger here. So this is our use selector. Well, because before we were just returning our state, but now our state looks different, right? Our state looks like these keys where it has this fruit pointing to an empty array, and it has this farmers pointing to currently the Corey and John farmers, right? So how do we get to this array?
You mean the farmers array? I mean the fruits.
The fruits array.
Right. We just key into it, right? State dot fruits, right?
That's right. State.fruits gives us back the array. So previously we were just doing return state because our whole state was just this array. But now we have to return state.fruits. This is the specific slice of state that we want to deal with in this component. Okay, so this is what we're starting to talk about, slices of state, because we don't need farmers involved here at all. We just want the fruits from this slice. So now everything should be honky-dory. Let's refresh. And we're good. So let's go ahead and test those. So now using the window, right? I have this store. And I have methods on the store. So I could call get state and whatnot. So let's go ahead. I also have hire farmer. So let's go ahead and try that. So we'll say window.dispatch to dispatch an action. And the action that we want to dispatch is from the creator. So we'll say window.store.hire farmer. Hire farmer is not a function. Oh, yeah, because it's not store, sorry. Hire farmer, and then we have to put in our, well, our farmer, let's go back. What's our farmer take in, our farmer action? Our farmer action took in a farmer. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in this farmer, where I'll say ID is 3. I'll say name is Jenya, and that's all I'll pass in. So I'm going to fire that. Cannot access farmer before initialization. What? What's that mean? I wonder if this has to do with this farmer's reducer that I made. I'm just going to remove that for now and go back to what I used to have. Save it and refresh. Okay, let's try that line again. Okay, so I've made some mistake over in that other example. And so we see that we're returning this object where our type is hire farmer, our payload is ID name, Jenya. And now let's go ahead and check our get state. And we should have, there we go, the key of Jenya in there. The ID, her ID pointing to her name. So we can see things are working. Okay, questions on how we're testing?
Can you just show the farmer action?
Sure. So the farmer actions, just plain old action. Right, at the same time, we can go ahead and export our pay farmer, which we said is going to take in an ID. And we said this is going to return a type of pay farmer with a payload of the ID. Right, so not too crazy here yet. But now we've got this second slice of state. So now that I'm done testing on the window, I'm going to go ahead and delete these or comment these out just so you have them as a reference. But for you in real life, you should delete them. Nobody wants to see it, all the junk you put on the window. Well, people might want to see it, but you don't want people to see it. You know, you want to have like, because also like gives them more access into things inside. So let's give you your next task as a breakout group. Okay, so I want you to create a component that lists all the farmers and a component that adds a new farmer. Yeah, I will push, Ashia. Adds a new farmer to your store. Okay, I'm going to give you all 15 minutes or so on this one. Ujwaka, can you go back to farmer actions for like 3 secs? Yeah, there's our farmer actions.
That's fruit stand actions.
Thank you. Farmer actions. Nearly identical, right? There is a lot of boilerplate code in Redux. And you'll like Redux Toolkit will remove a lot of this boilerplate code, which is super exciting in my opinion. Okay, but this is the task. I will push this right now. Just make sure, get status, get status. Farmers. Okay. Any questions on what I'm asking for? Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for that reminder. I've been turning it on and off because I don't want to like have a half hour of an empty room. So thanks for the reminders. Yeah, so usually we're going to be actually getting our IDs from the back end when this new farmer is created. So you don't really create IDs on the front end. That being said, if we are just dealing with a front end only application like we are today, there's a few different ways. There are packages that can give us like very random IDs because they don't really have to be a serial order, Jay. They just have to be unique, essentially, and probably semi-consistent in length and size, but just unique. That's the most important. So there are libraries that can do that. We also could create a outside variable that just is a counter, that reference that keeps updating. That would be fine as well. So let's go through it. Let's build it out. And see how we do. My screen is shared. Let me know if you, for some reason, cannot see it. Okay, so we'll start off with creating this farmer display. Let's say, so I'm going to go ahead and make a component. And I'm just going to call this farmer display. And I already have a couple farmers in my database, my store, because I've already added them. I have a Corey and John in there. That was more like just for kicks. So I'm going to import React. I'm going to say const farmer display. It's not going to take in anything. And I'm going to return some kind of UL of farmers, export default, farmer display. Okay, and I'm just gonna, where do I want to see this? Doesn't really matter to me. I guess I'll import this into my app for now. Underneath my cart, I'll do farmer display. Oops. Oh, good Lord. Fat fingers, eh? Mother of God. All right. Done. Okay, so we're here. There's no errors. We can inspect, and we should see somewhere, we see this little empty UL. Okay, so we've hooked up the component. So if we want to see all the farmers, where do all of those farmers live? Who can tell me that?
In state?
Yes, in our application state. Totally correct. So if I want to access something from our application state, where do I need to go? How do I get that?
Use selector.
Use selector.
I got to use selector. Exactly. This is mirroring the behavior of map state to props. Just to have that in your head. I'll say use selector from React Redux. Let's go ahead and grab it. So I'm going to say from here, I want my farmers back. I'm going to call use selector. This is a function that takes in the application state, and it's going to return something. I'm going to put a debugger in it so I can just see what I have. So I go here, I hit my debugger, and I'm going to look at my state. Great. Here, let me do it again. So what am I interested in?
The farmers,
Farmers. So how do I get those?
state.farmers.
State dot farmers. Okay, sounds good. Now I've got all my farmers here, but what's something that I may not love about this?
That is an object.
That it's an object, right? And objects are great. I have like this instant lookup. I can get the farmer I want immediately. Like if I had a specific farmer, like if I was at a param, right? I could very easily do state.farmers at some ID, like param 1, and then boom, I've already got it. I don't have to find it or anything. But if I just want a list of farmers, this object may not be the most ideal data type. What would be a better data type?
An array.
An array.
An array, right? Array's really nice for iteration. I don't have to do some for in loop. I could just do a map and just be done with it, yeah? Okay, so if I want an array, let's see. And specifically Doug says an array of objects. That sounds really good. So where do the objects that I want currently live? In the keys or the values?
In the values.
In the values, right? Because the keys are the IDs. So how can I take all of the values from an object and make them an array?
Object dot something.
Sorry, I say it with confidence. You're on the right track.
Object dot value.
Object, yeah, so let's try that. We could say object dot values, plural. This is given to us. I can invoke this, and inside I have to pass the object to which I want the values. So in that case, what would I be writing?
Farmers.
Farmers.
Yep, state.farmers, right? Because I still need to get this object. So if I write state.farmers, all of a sudden I've got my array of the objects. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to copy this line. I'm going to go over to my code, and I'm going to return object.values of state.farmers. So now I've got my farmers. Cool. So I can go ahead and iterate through these. I'm going to say farmers.map for each farmer. I can just go ahead and return an LI. And inside, I'll do my farmer name, farmer.name. And for the key, because I am dealing with iteration, I have a unique ID here on each farmer. So I'm going to say farmer.id. So in doing so, I should now be able to refresh my page and see Corey and John. Great, it's working. Any questions on how we got there?
Can you just go back to that for a second, please? The code.
I have a question.
Yep.
Well, really, just a comparison of the two, of how you did it and how we did it. Like, so for example, we did, excuse me, we did const farmers equals use selector that takes in a state, and we return state.farmers. Then we have a variable set to an empty array. And then we're keying into the farmers object and then saying let farmers equals farmers at that key. And then we're pushing that farmer into our farmers array.
Yeah, that sounds fine. I think it just sounds like you're doing a bit more work than necessary, but.
So basically that key into the farmer's object is the same thing as you doing object.values.
Well, I have a object which looks like I don't still have it, but it looks, with the IDs pointing to this is what the object looks like.
Right.
And so I'm taking all of the values from this object. That's what object.values does, is it takes in an object and returns all of the values as an array.
Okay. Okay, I see the comparison.
Cool. All right, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and make it so we can create a farmer. So I'll make another component. Now, really, I should probably be separating these now into fruit and farmers, right? I should probably make a folder called like fruits and be putting in my fruit things here to stay a little bit more organized. I don't know if that's going to completely break the app or if it's going to update it for me. It breaks it. But that's okay. I think that's all coming in just through app is where we're importing those. So I'll just say, oh, it did update those. Where is it broken? Fruit cart. Doesn't, oh, maybe I just need to save it. Can't resolve fruit stand actions. Okay, that's probably in my fruit. So I like this. I really like being organized. That's all. I think that's coming from, oh no. This looks good. Oh, I just have to save it, I think. Okay, great. Everything's still good. And let's go ahead and update. Let's make another folder called farmers, where I can pass my farmer display in here. Okay, and my farmer, we'll go back to app real quick because I think I have to save app. And we'll go back to my farmer display and save there. Sorry? Okay, so now we're all organized, which is great. So let's go ahead and create a new file inside of farmers. And we'll just call this create farmer.js. Import React from React, const create farmer. Maybe I'll stay consistent with my capitalization. So sorry about that. I'll butcher it more and then I'll fix it with a create. Okay, and this one, we'll export default, create farmer. Okay, and what do we want to return from this?
Some sort of form.
Some sort of form, right? Because this is where we're going to be creating it. And our form is going to have an input, let's say for our name. So I'll have a value pointing to some name, placeholder, let's say farmer name. And let's also add an on change. And my on change is going to update that name. So I know it's going to take an E, and I'm going to say set name to E. Oops, I don't know why I did that. To e.target.value. Okay, I know I'm going to do all that. Oops. Great. And now, let's go ahead and make sure I actually have a name and a set name. So I should use state. Oops. Okay, use state. And let's go ahead and create those. So we just do const. Hopefully people got this far. Set name is equal to use state. It's an input, so what should the default probably be?
Empty string.
Sure, we'll make it an empty string because we want it to start as empty. Let's also go ahead and import this right now into our app just to make sure that it's around. I'll do this underneath it and call this create farmer. And we've got something that we can update. Cool. Let's go back to our create farmer. And we should have some kind of on submit for our form. And we'll call that handle submit. And let's go ahead and write that function real quick. So let's say const handle submit. This is going to take in an event. What's the first thing I want to do? Yeah, let's prevent default. E dot prevent default. Awesome. And then what am I going to want to do? What's the next goal? So I've set up all like the skeleton here, but what am I going to want to do?
Handle submit function.
Yeah, I made that.
Oh wait, my fault.
You're gonna want to like use dispatch to add, like when you hit the submit button, you add that farmer's name into, like you dispatch the farmer's name. So wouldn't you also?
Exactly, right? I need to hire the farmer. So I need to get that action in here. So I'm going to import hire farmer from my actions.
And
farmer actions.
Wouldn't we also import a use dispatch?
That's right. And I also want to, because in order to dispatch an action to update my reducer, to hit my reducer to update my store, I have to get my dispatch. So I'm going to import use dispatch from, and I will do that from React Redux. Great. So let's go ahead and have the ability to use dispatch. So I'm going to say const dispatch, and I'm going to assign that to whatever we get back from our dispatch. So now we have the ability to dispatch an action. So I'm going to dispatch our action. And the action, in order to get the action, I'm going to use the action creator. So I'm going to say hire farmer. And hire farmer takes in what?
A farmer?
Sorry?
Takes in a farmer?
Takes in the farmer, right? And the farmer is what kind of data type?
An object.
An object. So I'm going to go ahead and make that object now. What are the keys to this object?
ID.
Okay, so there's an ID to something. And what's the other thing?
Name.
Name. And that's going to be our name, right? It matches nicely. So let's figure out what we can do with this ID. I think this will work. If not, I have a different way. But let's just like have some number. We'll say like next ID. And I'm going to set this to 2 because I think we already have, or I'll just set it to 3 because I know we don't already have that. And I'll just set this to next ID plus plus. So I'll keep incrementing it.
Corey?
Yep.
Don't you also have to add, because you had an ID and name, don't we also have to have a paid key?
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Payload. No, because the farmer, no, we don't. Good question. The paid key we're adding in the reducer, we add that. We could have that here. It would be okay. We could write paid false as well. But since they're all, every time we create one, it should already have that. I'm just going to handle that in the back end.
Okay.
Corey?
Yeah.
Can you use the length of the array of the farmers that you created when you did object.values?
Yeah, I could use the length as well. That's true.
Yeah.
But I don't want to. I don't feel like using selector in here because I don't need it, and I don't want to add too much confusion.
All right.
But you're right. Okay, so this looks like this may work, and then we should also, let's just set our name to be empty afterwards. Back to an empty element. Okay, let's give this a shot. So let's go ahead and add Genya. Enter, and we get our Genya. So it works. Let's try Tony. And it's all looking good. Okay. Any questions on that? So things to think about. So right now we're adding this ID on the front end, which we wouldn't really do on the back end. So far, all the code we've written has been what? Synchronous or asynchronous?
Asynchronous?
What is it?
Asynchronous?
Which code do you see that is asynchronous?
No, it's synchronous for sure.
That's okay. It's okay to not know or to get it wrong. But this has all been synchronous code.
Okay.
We've just fired one action, dispatched another action. Every line is run sequentially. We've never had to wait. We have always known that the next line runs after the line before. Now, in reality, when we're dealing with databases and whatnot, especially when we're in JavaScript, what will we be dealing with?
More asynchronous code because we'll be using Axios calls and stuff like that.
That's right. We're going to be dealing with a lot more asynchronous code. So there will be some changes on how things can be written. One of the ways we're going to change our code, I think we can probably wait till tomorrow for that, because I don't think the lesson today on the GitHub involves some asynchronicity, but not in the way that I want to show it. But the lab today does not, so it doesn't matter. But tomorrow we can start to look at how we can add some asynchronous code to this by using some middleware as to our advantage. But I want to make sure we really understand all of this. So the lab today, I think, is basically building something similar to this, but you're building a to-do app. But I'm sure we have some questions. So let's try to get some of those questions out into the open.
I don't really have a question. I just kind of, if you could do a short overview of the code from today.
Absolutely, yeah. Sounds great, Phil. Okay, so overview. So today we added a second reducer. We created a farmer's reducer. The farmer's reducer can hire a farmer and update our state, and we have a pay farmer to also update our application state. We also set it up so that our state looks a little bit different. We have this object where the IDs point to the actual farmer objects themselves. This is a little different than the array of objects we've been dealing with prior. So inside of there, we, in order to have multiple reducers, we created a root reducer. Our root reducer uses combined reducers, which we're getting from the Redux library. And what that does is it takes in numerous reducers and builds one reducer that combines all of them. And the labels of that are the keys pointing to the reducer themselves. Each key you can think of as a representation of a slice of state. So here we have a fruit slice of state pointing to the fruits reducer and a farmer slice of state pointing to the farmer's reducer. These reducers will update their slices. So it is possible for more than one key to listen for the same switch statement. But in this example, anything that has to do with farmers will go through the farmer's reducer, and anything that has to do with the slice of fruit state will go through the fruits stand reducer. So we then exported our root reducer and updated our store to have a root reducer instead of just one of those. Now we have all of our reducers in here. We passed in an initial state just to show that we can. This is what our state looks like in the beginning. Slightly more common practice would be to just have an empty object like that. But I'm going to go back to how it was. We haven't learned about enhancers and middleware yet very much. We'll touch on that tomorrow. We'll introduce Thunk. Okay. We touched on our farmer. We made a couple new action types, hire farmer and pay farmer. And we created couple new action creators. We created a hire farmer that takes in a farmer and returns the type hire farmer and the payload farmer, as well as a pay farmer, which took in just the ID and made that our payload and the type pay farmer. From there, we also made a couple new components. We made a farmer display component. This uses useSelector to take in a function. That function has access to the application state. From the application state, we said we wanted the farmer slice. And because that's an object where the keys are the ID and the values are the farmers themselves, we took just the values because we wanted an array of farmer objects. We mapped through them, gave them all an li key of ID, and we just are printing their name. We also created a create farmer component, which returns a form and an input. We're keeping a localized state of a name, and we are updating or setting that name on any change into the input value. This is, again, a controlled input because we're keeping track of the value the entire time. Upon submit, we're firing our handle submit, prevents our default, and then it's going to dispatch, which we're getting from our React Redux library. This is like the cousin of useSelector, and this mirrors the behavior of map dispatch to props in the older way of doing it. And we dispatch the invoked version, the invoked function of hire farmer taking in the farmer that we are trying to create. This will get dispatched, hit our reducer. Our reducer will see we want to hire a farmer. We'll pull it out of the payload. We'll set a paid property to false. We'll add it into the new state, and then we'll return that new state, which will then affect our useSelector, which is watching our state. So that will fire that again, which will cause this to re-render, and we'll get our new added farmer.
Can you show the create farmer again?
Sure. I don't want us to get too hot and bothered by the ID, but I am just referencing an outside variable that I keep updating. If I wanted the variable to be inside, I'd have to use the hook useRef, but I don't want to teach that right now because that's a little bit different than what we're learning right now. So just every time we're creating a new thing, we're updating that variable so that it's different each time.
Would you mind going to that app.js real quick? I just want to see.
No, I don't mind. And in our app.js, I'm just showing 4 components: our fruit stand, our fruit cart, farmer's display, and create farmer. Right? In real life, I'd probably start to make this a multi-page application or something, but with our React Router DOM. But for now, I'm just keeping it all on one page for simplicity's sake. Okay, so let's launch a poll. Let's see how are we feeling about this? Got 15 votes so far. Let's just get a couple more here. All right, I'm going to cut off the poll. I'll share the results. Are you able to see the results right now?
No.
No?
Not yet.
No.
All right, let me try again. How
Yes.
about now? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. So that's not bad. That's pretty good for well, I guess it's technically your fourth day of React or second or third. I'm not too. I don't really. Who's counting? It doesn't really matter. It's not too bad. I think with 3s and 4s, that's about where I would want you. I mean, I obviously want everybody at a 5, but like I wouldn't expect that at this point. 3 and 4 is pretty good spot to be in. If you're at 2, definitely seek some extra help so we can help you. But 3 and 4, you're in the right spot for hitting the lab, which is to make the to-do app. Okay. So that is everything. Yeah, no need to check in after lunch. We'll just have you working on your Redux 2 lab where you'll be building a to-do app. So that should be kind of fun. I will push. Thank you, Brandon, for that reminder. Let me stop the recording.